Welcome to the Grueling Truths College Football Preview Show. I am your co-host, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I'd like to introduce former San Francisco 49er, which it hates me to say. They did cheat and beat my Bengals in a couple Super Bowls. Help me welcome to the show, Randy Cross. I'm sorry, I can't let that go, Randy.
Oh wow, dropping the cheat thing. You
It's
got
the
us
only thing
confused
we've
with the Patriots.
got. It's the only thing. Randy, we haven't won a playoff game since 1990. You got to give us something. Even though we know
right.
you didn't cheat,
Right.
but still, you got to give us something.
Yeah. No, it's always fun to run into Bengals fans. It happens on a regular basis, especially when it's sort of unknown. Who'd you play for? San Francisco. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I didn't know there was any Bengal fans outside of me left, so that's always good to know that there's more.
Why, of course.
But, all right, so we're going to talk a little college football today, and I want to bring up right now the show is brought to you by BetNow.eu. 50% cashback bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000 when you use the promo code TRUTH50, so make sure you check them out. Also by Seat Giant. And let's just start off. I put up a little thing when we knew we were going to do this show yesterday, asking for listener questions on Facebook, and we've got some. And the first question is from Nick. I don't know if it's Nick Saban or not, but it is an Alabama question. And his question is, Alabama has always been able to reload, but with 7 new assistant coaches, and they lost a record 7 early entrants to the NFL draft, is this team still one of the top 2 teams in the country?
Yeah, I think pretty easily. And it's a credit to what, has been built there through a couple of athletic directors, administration, and with Nick's guiding hand. There is a set way now of doing business that is Alabama football. And it's survived. You look back on defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, position coaches, not just this year. Look over the last 5 to 10 years. And that's not even counting the number of consultants and everybody else that are in that building, and how often they move on to better jobs and whatnot. So I don't take it necessarily as a poor thing. I kind of look at it as A, regular change, or B, change that Nick thinks he's got to make, sort of, cause and effect when you look at that national championship game.
Yeah, and I think the thing about this team is I think this may be the most explosive Alabama offense we've seen with the quarterback Tua. I always screw his last name up, but Tua Tagovailoa, whatever it is. But I think
Tagovailoa.
Yeah, it is not to be disrespectful because I thought he deserved a Heisman Trophy last year. And you've got Steve Sarkisian as the offensive coordinator now. You've got 4 receivers who caught at least 40 balls last season returning. And the defense has to plug some holes, but Saban will do that. And with this offense, is it too soon to say that we might as well just fast forward to Alabama versus Clemson again?
I don't think it's a guarantee, but if you look at their schedule, up until that SEC championship game, they were at an epic pace offensively and just overall. Now, the last 2 or 3 opponents actually were able to offensively do some pretty good stuff against Alabama, and that's highly unusual. And also a testament to the talent on the other side of those particular teams.
Yeah,
but
go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any reason not to look at them on that side of the ball and say, wow, they've got a huge stable at running back. The receiver positions are ungodly as far as talent goes. And Tagovailoa and his ability to do what he can do with his arm, with his head, with his feet. I mean, he's just another year more mature as, sort of developing in that total package. And, it's close to a guaranteed number 1 pick in the draft as you're going to get.
Yeah, and you brought up a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the SEC because Georgia with Kirby Smart is a definite contender. They're as loaded as anybody. Also, is there anybody else in the SEC? I know LSU, but they always have quarterback issues. What is your take on LSU this year?
I think physically, talent-wise, you look over the last 5 years, I would argue they may have the best talent to suit the nuts in the SEC at every position, at 21 positions on the field. Unfortunately, their quarterback situation hasn't been fleshed out, I don't know, forever.
Yeah.
So, that's held them back. But though I think if you looked at what Joe Burrow was able to do in the second half of the season last year, I would be very excited if I was an LSU fan. And I'd look at that schedule and say, you know what? If we can get by Texas early on, we've got a shot to set up some pretty titanic clashes when it comes to later in the year.
Yeah, and also I wanted to bring up the Randy Cross podcast, which you can hear every Wednesday on The Grueling Truth. And you had Phil Steele on last week, and you want to talk a little bit about that podcast before we go forward, because I thought it was very informative, and Phil knows his stuff.
Oh, he does. He does. I have a tendency to have people on, whatever the subject is we decide on, that I want to hear about, and I want to learn stuff from them. So, and Phil's a great example because, as they say in the radio business, that boy can go. You just have to say hi, welcome, and how about, and just insert conference name here, and Phil can just go as far as teams and talent and coaches, and he's unbelievable. He's nearly as encyclopedic as his magazine. So I think if you want to check that out, it's at randycross.com, and all the regular platforms you can get it, and you can get it now at the Grueling Truth. But I hope you enjoy it. It's something that it's not your basic sports podcast, though sports ends up being the meat of what we do.
All right, let's go back to some listener questions, and this kind of ties in with, this was one of those teams to put some points on Bama at the end of the year, and that is Oklahoma. And we have Sooner Rob, who wants to know if Oklahoma has finally figured out their defensive issues.
Well, what's their goal for the year? Realistically, when you look at it, and I'm sure Rob would like a defense like his offense, but heck, I would say aspire for 65, 60th, 65th, 70th. Aspire for average first, because they were way low.
Yeah,
average.
They were 114 last year.
Yeah, and in some categories much lower than that, like 129 in pass defense. Part of it's a product of being in the Big 12. And being in a conference that's got a lot of really good offense and specifically a lot of good passing offenses. But, it can't be a talent issue. I don't think you can at any time say, oh, well, they just don't get the guys. Because Oklahoma's just dripping with athletes. I think it's finding that right system. It didn't hold back their defense when the Stoops were in charge, so I don't think there's any reason you'd think they would hold them back now.
Yeah, which makes it perplexing, because if it's not a player issue. And new defensive coordinator Alex Grinch, the interesting thing about him is he went to Washington State with Mike Leach and his air raid system. Mike Leach's teams have always been kind of the same. They're winning games 54-50, and he turned Washington State into a top 20 defense nationally just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that's going to be, and plus what you learn, no one really appreciates, I think, or doesn't appreciate enough how much a coach like that can learn every single day in practice, just looking at and watching his own offense and ways, if he can frustrate Mike Leach and he can frustrate his offense, he's doing something right, and he's got something that will transfer over when it comes to being at a place, especially like Oklahoma, because of the West Virginias and teams like that, Texas Tech, that you're going to see that are, that ball's in the air constantly, and we're not talking kicks.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Big 12. I mean, Texas is a team that has to replace a lot from last year. What's your outlook for Texas here?
I think a lot better. I think things are definitely looking up. Is this a undefeated year? Well, I mean, if you talk to my guy Brian Jones from Inside College Football, I mean, he's a Longhorn for life, though he started at UCLA. And he happens to think that this is a team that can be really, really special. I just think if you crack open the schedule and you look at that, they better be special, because with the teams that they play and where they play, a lot of them, they're gonna have to be a pretty Titanic style offense and defense to deal with the teams that they're going to have to play in the schedule. But I can see them being one of those, 10-win teams that any given day can probably beat anybody in the country.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about the Big 12 is here, you've got new coaches at West Virginia, Texas Tech, and Kansas State, which kind of leaves this as a little bit of an unknown also, because those are three teams that are usually in the top half of the Big 12.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then you got a team like Gundy's guys in Oklahoma State. What's Matt Rule going to do at Baylor? I get to see him early on in the year down at Rice. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. And, if indeed, he can make that huge of a difference with a kid like Brewer at quarterback. But, that conference in general is not top heavy, but not as top heavy as it used to be, because it basically used to be Oklahoma and Texas, and then insert name here. But I think you can go all the way down, probably into the 8-9 spot, and say you can find a 8-win team down there that's going to be able to do some great stuff, but might be 500 in the conference.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a team that has really come on the last couple of years, and I think it's mainly because of great coaching, and that's Iowa State, and they're probably the one team here that you can say has a good defense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Campbell's the job he's done. You look at they go on the road and they beat people. They get people in their place, and the folks go crazy and they beat people. And they do it with, the kind of combination you want, the kind of combination you can consistently count on. And if you can bring a defense in the Big 12 to the table and get turnovers and get, more importantly, to an offense, you get 3 and outs. Those can start putting nails in coffins when you have an offense that can strike and score some points.
All right, we've got Dan who has a question about USC, and he wants to know how long Clay Helton can survive, because it seems that Dan is disgruntled and wishes Clay Helton was already fired.
Yeah. I always feel for coaches, and it's a different guy every year, or a different set of guys every year that, especially one or two, that you kind of start to think that maybe hot seat is their nickname and or somewhere in their name, because they always go hand in hand. SC sets a high standard. You look at, the amount of wins over the last 100 years, SC's up there in the top 5 as a football program, and they expect to win. I've got some former teammates that, on social media that are extremely vocal about what they think SC should do. And I think Helton, part of it's going to be getting the right quarterback, because he's got an NFL-like stable at wide receiver, and they will always have good offensive lines. The problem for them is going to be, getting things back to what their normal was on the defensive side of the ball. Not only with the big physical D linemen, but they always had a whole different kind of defensive back. And, specifically outside linebackers that are big-time disruptors. And if they can do that, they can get back to being the kind of team that everyone expects them to be. But, I would say between the two teams in LA, and I do this admittedly with more than a little bit of prejudice involved when it comes to the other team in LA. I think from an optimistic standpoint, UCLA has the most upside.
Yeah, plus I think UCLA is going to give Chip Kelly a little bit more rope, just because he has more of a pedigree too.
Well, that, and you got to look at what you inherit.
Yeah.
That talent-wise, I thought Neuheisel personally was on the right track when he got fired. You look at the talent that he had there. I think, another one of those years, and it could have been a moot point as far as whether or not you wanted to have him there. Hundley gets there, he gets into the games, he starts winning and doing stuff. It's a whole different argument for him, but they haven't recovered since then. I was a huge proponent of Jim Mora, and he just did not work out the way I thought, he would work out, especially in the recruiting world, because, specifically at the line of scrimmage, they were substandard for a while. They were not, they weren't even in the top 2/3 of the Pac-12, which leaves you in some pretty precarious spots when you start ranking people nationally. So, yeah, I think he's on the right track, but it's all about that old saying about the Jimmies and Joes. It's all about those guys.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, USC, getting back to them, UCLA's in better shape just because USC opens with Fresno State, which I think is a really good football team. Then they play Stanford. They're at BYU. Then they play Utah, and I think Utah is a legitimate contender again in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I agree. And personally, if my Bruins can get out of the first month, relatively unscathed, above 500, they've got at Cincinnati, San Diego State, Oklahoma, and at Washington State.
And those are four pretty good teams.
Yeah, I could see UCLA winning 8 games this year, but if they're going to win 8 games, they got to be at least 500 coming out of that first month.
Yeah, and I think that first game at Cincinnati is a big game for them, just coming off a 3-win season, because Cincinnati with Luke Fickell, I think they're a legitimate football team. They went to UCLA and beat UCLA last year, and that would be huge if the Bruins could come to Cincinnati and beat the Bearcats.
It would be gigantic. I don't think enough people appreciate American Conference football, especially in relationship to, perhaps the Pac-12 as far as the kind of football that is played. I just think they've got an opportunity to make quite a mark, because they've not only got UCLA in that opener, and pretty short order they get Ohio State, where Fickell gets to go back to the Horseshoe, I believe.
Yeah.
And they're going to be able to mark their territory, and he's got the kind of talent that you can start doing that. That's going to impress a lot of people.
He is a great football coach. Luke Fickell, what do you think?
Heck, he won 11 games last year.
Oh, yeah. I think that the only problem for Cincinnati is keeping Luke Fickell in-house once they win, 10, 11, 12 games again.
Yeah, the hard thing about keeping him would be if Ryan Day didn't work out. But unfortunately for Luke Fickell, I don't think that will come to fruition. I think Ryan Day is going to be pretty doggone successful.
You would think so. But you never know. It's hard to follow a guy that was as great as what Urban Meyer was, even if you are a really good coach.
Yeah. I've got to agree with you. I just think you're going to find out a lot about his Ryan Day's adaptability and coaching style, and what you're going to develop into this year. Because I think all things being equal, he should have a hands-on relationship with Justin Fields, transfer from Georgia.
Yeah,
and Justin Fields has talent that very few cornerbacks have.
Yeah, I think Fields will be better than Haskins.
Yeah, can he? But the problem is, can he harness him on the passing side?
Yeah.
In Haskins, you had a guy that could really spin it, but wasn't much of a threat running. On the other hand, you're going to have this kid who I think legitimately is that term dual threat. He's a guy that can hurt you with both sides of his game. He's not totally unlike Jalen Hurts at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be another guy that's going to benefit from Lincoln Riley and being able to develop his passing game style.
Yeah, and when we look at the Big Ten then with Ohio State, who is the biggest contender? And we've got a question from, I assume, a Nebraska Cornhusker fan, just because of the Cornhusker pictures all over the thing he sent. But he wants to know if Nebraska, he says, number one, we know we're headed in the right direction. Nothing like a Cornhusker fan, is there? He said, but is it too soon to think about winning a Big Ten championship?
It's probably not too soon. It's not too soon to think of winning a title on your side of the Big Ten. And I think, Frost is on his way to having that kind of a team. Now he's going to have everything fall just the right way for him to do that. If you gave out like Phil Steele gives the whole, most improved teams and whatnot, they'd be the team in the Big Ten you'd look at and go, well, watch out for them. Because people kind of looked at Nebraska, I think, and looked at Scott Frost and said, what a train wreck. Well, he inherited a train wreck.
Yeah.
And
by the end of the year, they weren't a train wreck either.
Yeah, they're not a train wreck anymore, and I wouldn't expect them to play like that during this season. I think this could be a kind of a transformative period for that program to get back to where they've always been.
Yeah, especially in the West, where you've got usually the most talented teams, Wisconsin, and they never have a quarterback. They're kind of like the northern version of LSU. Another team that I like in the Big Ten, which could surprise people, I think, is Minnesota with Tanner Morgan at quarterback.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Is it obligatory? We got to say something about row the boat, or can we actually just refer to him as a coach?
We'll just call him PJ. Let's see. He is entertaining, though, but I don't know how much you've seen of Tanner Morgan, but I think Tanner Morgan's the real deal.
Yeah, no, I've only seen video on him. Haven't seen him obviously live and in person, but in that conference and that side, like I said, you can do some pretty special things on that side. I think Michigan and Ohio State and Michigan State kind of suck all the air out of the room in the Big Ten, and people forget about it.
Yeah. Another question we have from Lori, who wants to know, if not now, then when for Jim Harbaugh? I don't know if she's talking about when he'll be fired or when he'll win, but my take on Jim Harbaugh is this. This is a team that has 3 10-win seasons out of 4 and only had 1 in the previous 9 years before he got there.
Yeah, I look at Michigan personally as a huge disappointment the last couple of years. I'm a big fan of what Harbaugh's been able to do, not only at this level, but also at the pro level, what he did in San Francisco. Enough with the baseball hat and the glasses. That shtick's getting pretty old. But he's got a team that should be in the playoffs this year, and that's going to start and finish with beating Ohio State finally. And being able to beat the Michigan States and being able to be a dominant team, it'll be interesting personally to see them and how ready to play they are against Army early on.
Yeah, because Army's a really good team. Yeah.
Well, you can scoff all you want about Army, but Oklahoma found out last year that you start stringing along a couple of 3-and-outs and they keep holding on to the ball, they can get you puckering up pretty quick. And that's going to be a nice test for Michigan. They should beat them handily, but it's not impossible to draw the scenario where they would.
Well, I think there's a case to be made off of last year and what they returned, and Army should maybe be in the bottom of the top 25 right now.
Yeah. I think they're one of those teams that once you see them play the way they have, people are going to have to see, year after year, kind of what Navy did under Paul Johnson and then Kenny Niumatalolo, where, they win 8, they win 9, they win 10, and Jeff Monken's on his way to doing that. He really is. But I think it's going to take another year or so for people to put them in that almost, here they are, they're almost a default top 25 team.
Yeah. That, and they're in a conference that is not considered big time, but as you talked about before, I mean, there's some really good teams outside of the Power 5 conferences. So, got a question here from Ralph, who is from Orlando, so you know where this is going. Will UCF ever get the credit they deserve? which I think they have gotten a credit, just not by the pollsters at the end of 2 years ago.
Yeah. It's kind of you are who you are. You know, if it's in your DNA or within your sphere of influence to get yourself into a Power 5 conference, I'm sure they'd love that opportunity at UCF. But until that happens, you're going to have to settle for being a dominant team. And Heupel's this year going to have a real challenge having that kind of a dominant team, I think. You know, will he win 8 games, 9 games? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they'll do that. But, you know, it's people, they're demanding of programs that are in the group of 5 when it comes to not only rankings, but how high in the rankings you can get. You've got to be a consistent winner, and there's no other substitution. I mean, double-digit games, consistent winner. And I think they're just about ready to get into that consistent, thought as a program. But they're just now getting there.
All right. Let's see. I forgot my glasses. I told you that earlier. We have Robert, who wants to know if Trevor Lawrence can handle the hype.
I don't think there's any doubt. If you watched him, look at his stats from 2018. It's pretty easy to forget that he didn't start till game 5.
Yeah.
Kelly Bryant, that was his team for the first month.
Well, Kelly Bryant took his team to the college football playoffs the year before and lost.
Yeah, and he not only he started in week 5, and then he got hurt. And he it took the third team quarterback to come in and get that win for Clemson.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Lawrence has got the tools. He's got the kind of head that is going to enable him to weather this storm, because they're going to be a great team again. They're going to build off that 15-0. He's going to build off those stats. He's going to hear about Heisman. And maybe before the midseason, but at least then, is when the questions are going to start coming about the NFL draft. And why can't you be in the draft this year? And you would have been a top 3 pick last year. And you should be a top pick this year. And, it's just coming. There's no other way around it. But he's got a real stable environment there at Clemson, and that's a testament to Dabo.
Yeah, and I think this, as an NFL fan, if your team goes 0-16 next year, you're in good shape for the next 10 to 12 years at least. Because I think this kid's a stud. And, I mean, when you watch what he did to Nick Saban, now Nick Saban's defense is not an NFL defense, but is as close as you're going to get to one in college. And to shred them for 347 yards as a freshman in a national championship game is absolutely nuts.
I know one thing. Now Bama kind of had them, but he sent a lot of programs in that top 10, top 20 type rankings, searching for another Ross, searching for those kind of playmakers that can disrupt the game immediately with one catch and one play, and then back that up with another play. And the delivery system, when you see a guy that talent, sometimes gets overlooked. But what a combination, those receivers and that arm.
All right, we have a question from a Notre Dame fan, because there's always a Notre Dame fan out there asking a question.
Of course.
Rob, what is the most important game for Notre Dame in 2019? I would think that would be Georgia, without saying much of anything, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. At Georgia, at night, in that environment, we're going to find out. Ian Book is the guy that quietly has done some pretty special things at Notre Dame, and they've got a really good offensive line, and they've got some really good talent on the defensive side. How quickly that defense can start playing at the level, that Kelly expects, and then you could look at, that offensive line I talked about. They could dominate the game, but you're talking, Georgia, who physically is, a top, just on the hoof, they're a top 3 program.
All right, another question. Can Jimbo Fisher Do better than last year. And I would say with that, I think Texas A&M will be better than last year, but with their schedule, the record may not be better than last year, if that makes any sense.
Well, that's the problem. I remember back when when A&M and Missouri first joined the SEC, it wasn't hard to see which one of those two teams got the best draw. Missouri going into the East was a great deal, and Texas A&M being in the deep end of the pool, in the West in the SEC. I don't know. Look down their schedule. They've got the talent. They should be a lot better. Kellen Mond, I think, is going to be another one of those quarterbacks you'll hear a lot of Heisman talk about early, especially if he gets off to a hot start. Jimbo's he knows how to get there. And I think he's just now getting his program to that point. I would say if he gets 10 wins this year, that's a pretty amazing job. And I would imagine sometime in the next 5 years, if he keeps getting his team progressing the way they are, he's going to win a national championship.
Well, I'll tell you, this year they include trips to Clemson, Georgia, and LSU. Mm-hmm. And they host Alabama and Auburn. I would say this. Yeah. If they lose 3 games this year and it's out of those 5 and they win the other 2, they probably deserve to be in the college football playoffs.
Yeah, I know. And the funny thing is you're talking about 9-3.
Yeah.
That to me is – but, it's if this is one of those years where multiple losses can get you in the playoffs, which I don't know if that will – they'll be common enough for us to see it again soon, but then you'd have to consider that. That's something you'd have to look at and go, well, God, look at the teams, A, they played, B, they beat, and C, how close the other games were.
All right. I just got a text from a friend of the show, Leon Searcy, so you know where this is going. He wants to know how badly you think the Hurricanes will wreck Florida on Saturday.
How badly they'll wreck Florida? Yeah. I would say there's a lot of questions going into that game, and the lion's share of them are on the Hurricane side more than it is on the Gators side. It is a quote-unquote neutral site game, though it's a pretty short drive from Gainesville to Orlando. I expect Florida, honestly, to win that game. And could Miami? I think Miami could have a really good year, really special year. But, unless they come out of the chute just smoking, and I mean smoking, and their freshman quarterback comes out with poise and everything else, I think it's just too much too early to expect that much out of the Hurricanes.
Yeah, the chance I would give the Hurricanes is I think the Gators finally, for the first time in a while, had an above-average offensive line last year, but they've got to replace 4 starters from that unit, and I think Miami, the Hurricanes, have one of the best and deepest defensive lines in college football. So especially with it being the first game, I wouldn't rule out Miami possibly pulling an upset here just with their defensive front against a younger Florida offensive line.
Yeah, you're going to find out the number one ingredient in the SEC West, the SEC in general, that you've got to have. And it's something that Georgia, the other team that everyone loves so much out of the East, has, and that's just that refill talent. That plug-and-play talent, that when you get a guy that goes away, suddenly you're putting a sophomore or junior that's been chomping at the bit and waiting for his chance and was a 4 or 5 star coming out of high school. And suddenly you don't take a step back. And Mullen's got the chance to build that kind of thing at Florida.
Yeah, and he did a great job last year with them, and that's a program that wasn't what it had been, but it looks like with Mullins they could get back there, which I think then – we see the SEC with Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, with Mullins at Florida, of course, the old standby 3 or 4 Studley teams. Then you've got, by far, the best conference in college football again, which I think over the last few years it's been about 2 or 3 teams, and that was it. There wasn't really the depth that there had been in years past.
Yeah, and on the Miami side, what did the ACC have last year? 11 teams go to bowl games. The ACC, the quality of ball in the ACC, it's not, in my mind, equal to the SEC because top to bottom, the SEC is a better conference. But the ACC, really good teams, and led by the national champions, are as good as the top end of the SEC.
Well, I think the key here for the ACC is Florida State and Willie Taggart and Miami with Coach Diaz really coming back, because it seemed like you had programs like North Carolina, stuff like that were kind of middle-to-rung teams that had a couple good years. They dropped off a little bit last year. And when you look at the ACC, I don't think there's anybody there that can even make a run at Clemson this year, Randy.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad. I know a lot of Florida State people are looking for their team and hoping their team gets back in that winning bent again pretty quick. But to me, it's kind of sad to go into the last couple of years and not have Florida State. I mean, that should be a program. That should be a stadium. That should be a place that's as close to an automatic as exists in college football. I hope Willie Taggart can get him back there, but the number one thing is talent, and we say that about a lot of teams, but they have to have the talent, and that means recruiting. And then once you recruit them, you got to figure out what the hell to do with them. Yeah. So I would love to see Florida State back, but I'm not expecting it anytime in the next couple of years.
All right, real quick question, and then we'll wrap it up. Oregon, Justin Herbert. What do you think about Justin? Is Oregon the best team in the Pac-12 going into this season?
It kind of depends on how quickly Nick Eason adapts at Washington and what he does for that offense. We know, Peterson's going to have a physical team. We know he's going to be able to run the ball somewhat, or pretty well actually. But if Eason can be the kind of guy that really starts wowing people, then they can be right there with Oregon. So, I got them neck and neck overall with don't ignore Utah. Utah's not going to be flashy, but at the line of scrimmage and special teams, they're worth seeing just for that.
And that's
the heck with the talent. Yeah, the heck with the so-called skill guys.
I think Utah is my favorite to win the Pac-12.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree.
Because they're the team with the least amount of questions also.
Yeah, you looked at them last year, the way they were playing until the QB and the running back went down, and they dropped off pretty good. But when you lose that kind of talent, you should drop off pretty good.
Yeah.
The top teams in the country would drop off pretty good.
And with Herbert, my biggest question with Oregon is, I think he may be one of the better passers in college football, but he really needs a go-to guy to emerge. And I don't know if that's going to happen for Oregon with the way they recruit and their 10 different uniforms for each game. I'm sure they've made an effort to get him a guy, but he needs a go-to guy, I think, to really be able to win the Pac-12. And defensively, I think they've got a first-year defensive coordinator, so I think there's a lot of questions on the defensive side of the ball for Oregon also.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you look at what Cristobal's done, the Taggart period that year was more of a interim thing, as it turns out. And they didn't suffer talent-wise. They took a little bit of a hit when Chip Kelly left. But this is a program that is really, really talented. Very, obviously resources isn't a problem. I would expect them to have that kind of talent at wide receiver. Because, if you're in the West Coast, hell, if you're in the South, the Midwest, I don't care if you're a Texas kid and they recruit big in Texas, I'd want to go to Oregon. I'd want to not only be able to have those facilities, but, look at the quarterback position and the kids they've had there over the last few years. know that ball's going to be in the air. And if you're a receiver, that's all you ask.
Yeah. All right, Randy. We won't keep you any longer. I know you got things to do today, including a show, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I got to get over to my facility and do that around 2 o'clock.
All right, guys, and I will assume you'll be able to hear that tonight on The Grueling Truth. Also, you want to tell everybody, I know you got a YouTube channel too, right?
Yeah, we do. It's the Randy Cross Podcast. Real catchy name. Got to make it. For a while it was called Unsafe Spaces. I'm trying to make it a little bit easier, a little less mystery, and a little bit more just simple information.
Yeah, that's how we do it too. Inside Boxing Daily, NFL Weekly Pick'em Show, CFL Weekly Pick'em Show, which you can hear tonight live at 9 o'clock Eastern Time with myself, Brian Schmidt, and former CFL legendary running back, won 4 Grey Cups, Robert Drummond, so make sure you check us out there also. And I want to remind you, our sponsor, BetNow.eu, promo code TRUTH50 to get a 50% cash back bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000. 3 o'clock, Survive in Advance with me and Steve Risley, and I know Steve's listening. Steve, don't interrupt me so much today. That was for Randy. But it'll be me, Steve Risley, Anthony Savino from the FF Faceoff, and our Detroit Lions beat writer Sam McGinnis will be on to break down the NFC North Division. That'll be at 3 o'clock Eastern live, so make sure you check us out there. I want to remind everybody you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, CastBox, Google Podcast. Basically, anywhere you find podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So, for Randy Cross, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.